Good evening, friends. Welcome to the India Power Talk. As we speak, we have crossed the 2000 subscriber mark to our YouTube channel. And I would like to wholeheartedly thank all of you for being part of this journey with me. As you know, India Power Talk is an initiative wherein we invite international thought leaders and domain experts to create an easily accessible digital reservoir of their insights, experiences, and strategies. This would benefit not just the Indian entrepreneurs, but also international business, investors, strategic partners who are part of or intend to invest in India. International education. The global lockdown has forcibly rebooted the environment, economy, and education. And when we speak of education, every form of international education is badly affected by the COVID crisis. Be it study abroad, schemes or transnational collaborative programs between universities, capacity building projects in developing countries. Majority universities are closed and or are delivering all education online. The new social distancing norms, I guess, are affecting on-campus learning in physical spaces from the international classroom to libraries and on-campus students networking places. However, I would think this is a lifetime opportunity for global educationists to look positively about the entire education system, be it collaborations or rethinking the pedagogy. There's a great opportunity to develop new forms of personalized education and to innovate in student evaluation, including online, beyond the more conventional assessments. It's a great opportunity to create flexible and unified forms of lifelong learning beyond initial education to upskill and reskill workers for the digital economy. Collaborations between universities, academicians, professors must happen to shape our future of the planet and people. There is just no choice, I guess. And to talk on this today, we have Joe Nesbitt, Director, UniConnectedEd, and Vice President M Square Media UK, with over 30 years of rich and hands-on experience in higher education. Formerly served as a director and deputy director at the University of Southampton, with a focus on international recruitment and development. Earlier at Solent University, she consolidated the institution's international activities and worked as the director of the international office. She is consulted regularly for government bodies, works with the British Council and other organizations. She has led several university consortia and has been invited speaker at numerous conferences. I have great pleasure and privilege to welcome Joe Nesbitt. Joe, could you be kind to initiate today's discussion by giving an overview about your experience as Director International and also talking about some of the top global alliances of universities, their objectives and functioning that you have handled?
Thank you very much, Nitin. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And I don't think I hold any sort of secret about my passion for internationalization in higher education. And in fact, after having done a classics degree, I took an MBA focusing on higher education management. And the research that I undertook was around internationalization, particularly around the administrative staff at universities. So I think it's quite an interesting subject. I do specialize in international relations, including transnational education, or as we all call it now, TNE. I specialize in global networks. I facilitate international collaborative partnerships. I do cross-border partnerships. And I was actually in at the ground at a university worldwide network, which is a global network of 23 universities across 13 countries. So I think we're going to be talking a little bit more about that later on.
Sure.
I've also been quite interested in public-private partnerships, particularly around higher education. I think that's becoming even more pertinent now in what's happening in the world. How can they improve educational organizations? And I have actually been involved in a number of partnerships like that with commercial organizations. And as I say, I think that's going to become more and more important going forward. Just a little bit about international offices, which have become very prominent over the years with internationalization. So you mentioned recruitment of students. Now, has huge financial implications for universities, particularly UK, US, Australia, Canada. But I also managed the mobility of staff, so that included capacity building of staff. Students programs, I looked at collaborative partnerships, student support, welfare, English language, supporting our international alumni, had fantastic experiences with, in India in particular, with our international alumni. So for the University of Southampton, particularly around law and engineering, terrific story actually, Nitin, about a lawyer who's currently in Bangalore, and I saw her recently, and she asked if she could be involved with talking to current students, women in particular, and how they could actually make their careers in law. So that was really terrific, where there's a nice sort of, you know, relationship between the alumni and the current students. And the other thing I've done is with Solent University, which has a maritime academy. So obviously in India, maritime law, there's a lot to do with shipping. So again, the alumni there are able to help newly graduated students for mentoring, employability, careers. So that's all been really great. You mentioned I work with government bodies, and I've been very interested in lobbying. And in fact, I'm working now to lobby the Indian government about the new national education policy, which I think we're going to talk about later. For that one in particular, we all know what happened in 2009 with the UK taking away the post-study work experience visa for international students. So I lobbied very strongly about that, and delighted to say this year the UK has reversed that, and we're looking to see a 2-year post-study work visa coming in again. I would say that international partnerships aren't new. I've been in the business for 30 years, so I've seen a lot of that. Particularly in the late 1990s, a number of global networks were set up and established. Universitas 21 was set up in 1997. And they originally focused, I think, on the mobility of undergraduate students, fostering, and I love this, they foster global citizenships and encourage institutional innovation. The Worldwide University Network was the network I was involved with. 23 members across 13 countries, I think I mentioned. But they were much more focused, or they are much more focused on research, developing innovative solutions to global challenges, and nurturing the young researchers who are going to become tomorrow's leaders. So both networks share visions around internationalization. They want to foster an environment of mutual collaboration and support, and the advancement of globally engaged citizens, and they want to collaborate on effective solutions for global challenges. And even today, I would say that that's WUN, Worldwide University Network, still remains focused on research, whilst U21 includes taught courses, so they kind of focus more on the students. A good example of this, closer to home for you, is the University of Delhi, University of Birmingham, University of Melbourne have come together for a taught masters, but they're teaching within, face-to-face. But both of these networks now, and I know we'll talk about this later on, are involved in the development of, or are already delivering, online programs. If you'd like to indulge me for a moment, I'd like to highlight the Universitas 21 mission statement, and obviously listeners can go to either of these websites and have a look themselves. I thought it gave a really good indication of what global networks are trying to achieve. So Universitas 21 is a leading global network of research-intensive universities that empowers its members to share excellence, collaborate across borders, and nurture global knowledge exchange. Committed to promoting the value of internationalization and multinational collaboration, Universitas 21 facilitates the delivery of programs, activities, and initiatives which could not be delivered through a single university or via a bilateral agreement. And of course, that's where we've seen most of those relationships in the past, around bilateral or trilateral agreements.
I see. Really, many thanks, Joe. And that's really, very deep knowledge and deep experience of, and a vast experience of working with the foreign collaborations between the universities. And that's really a great insight. I have been working on foreign collaborations for over 2 decades now. But Joe, honestly, I'm really curious to know, how do the global universities collaborate, and who drives these initiatives, and what are the considerations for these collaborations?
Yeah. That's a really interesting question. How did these global networks get set up? So is it top down? Is it bottom up? And I think, in my experience, they're typically driven from the top. They're typically driven with very strong strategic leadership. So it will be coming from the vice chancellor or the president, and the networks tick a lot of boxes for universities and institutions like that. So they'll tick an education box, they'll tick an internationalization box, they'll tick the research box, and it raises the profile of the institutions. But of course, this is a kind of a ranking and how things are sort of reported to government. So they really do tick a lot of boxes in that respect. So I think what's happened is we have two very strong networks, WN and Universitas 21. There are other networks that have kind of started off, and I think what is required is for a really strong leadership. And I think the pandemic has really provided a really good environment for presidents to come together and set up ecosystems. And I will say later on, that this is going to make or break a number of institutions going forward. We will see, I think some institutions failing going forward. But if you are in an environment with other kind of like-minded universities, then there is strength in that. So how do you do that? You have a very good, strong strategic leadership. You can draw on current bilateral partnerships or trilateral partnerships, and you should always go with your strengths. So that's why these two networks have been so successful, because they have focused on very key global challenges.
Great. I recollect last week when we discussed, you said leadership is very critical, and it could upset the equilibrium. And can you elaborate that?
Oh, yes. Leadership changes can greatly upset the equilibrium. Yeah. Particularly if a new vice chancellor or president comes in and they know, and it's no longer of strategic sort of objectives, or it doesn't have the same goals. And I think the other issue is that there is always a fee. So if there is finance involved in these, a subscription for membership, an institution will say, or a leader will say, what's in it for my institution? I mean, it does make sense, doesn't it? And we were saying, how are partners selected? Well, that is usually about the kind of equal ranking, probably. It doesn't necessarily have to be equal, but the key is about the area of research or strength of that institution, and people will be approached in that respect. Of course, if you're in an institution and you think this would be a great idea to be part of one of these networks, as a number of presidents have done, start up your own. So there are a number of other kind of networks which I haven't talked about. There are regional networks that are very sort of famous, the Pacific Rim one, the Australian Africa kind of network. So there's various ways that you can approach the kind of global networks. They can be regional, they can be sort of subject specific, but it is about internationalization. It is about those sorts of big big research areas. And also, these networks have to deliver on their credibility. So they can take some years to build. So obviously, I was involved in WN in 2000, which is nearly 20 years ago, and WN is still going extremely strong. The key measurables, obviously, joint funding. Winning bids, joint research, publication, conferences, programs, student mobility, staff mobility, expertise to governments, non-government bodies. They work with corporates, and they can actually sort of, have relationships with the media as well. So they're very highly influential. So what I would sort of say is that the networks draw on national, regional, and international objectives and priorities. And I think a really good example of this is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals set up by the United Nations. A network could find synergies relating to global challenges such as climate change or public health. And I mean, public health now, this is, massive after the pandemic.
Absolutely.
I think a really interesting part of this is that some institutions will have academic disciplines that won't be involved in the networks, and that can actually cause friction with academic colleagues. So that's quite interesting, yeah.
Great. From the collaborations of universities and the reasons for them to collaborate and the key measurables. Let's talk about students now. Let's now go ahead and see how does this global alliances of universities actually help students.
So really important, listen, really important, our students. And I think both WN and Universitas 21 are good examples. Universitas 21 in particular, that was their raison d'etre for kind of getting their network together. But if I talk about WN, they really invest in education, but it's more at the graduate level. So they do it through a research mobility program. So this is for early career researchers. They include postgraduate, postdoctoral students. They gain specialized experience in an international context. It also helps them professionalize their own networks. At undergraduate level, one does have some initiatives, and they bring the undergraduate students around the network and introduce them to a sort of a multiple kind of experience universities, which gives them a research experience. And I know all governments at the moment are talking about undergraduate students getting a research experience within that undergraduate degree. So that's actually really important. Universitas 21, I think, is actually a really interesting case because they have kind of internationally focused innovation opportunities, actual and virtual, which enhance student engagement, mobility and employability and help prepare students for life and work across international borders and cultural boundaries. So students within these networks are going to get something extra than they would normally do with either a bilateral or a trilateral relationship. So student-focused activities include a range of online student initiatives, subsidized short-term and other traditional and non-traditional student mobility initiatives. And a really good example of that is 100 UK students from that network come to India every year and do work experience through the British Council. What an amazing opportunity for those guys. I think it's terrific. So themes in the networks of innovative teaching. So this is about the researchers actually coming together in the network, talking about teaching innovation, teaching excellence. And by doing that, they can significantly enhance educational standards in any of those individual universities in the network. And that doesn't cause any threat within the network because if you look more on the research side, resources, expertise, research intelligence, it's all a little bit dangerous to be sharing, can cause some friction. But if it's about teaching and improving teaching and the teaching experience, then only the students will benefit from that. And nobody can argue with us doing better for our students.
Great. Joe, this is so fascinating and I guess really interesting opportunity for students across the jurisdictions. And I can understand how and what the students must be benefiting out of it. Last week, Joe, during the discussions, you mentioned to me the opportunities that the current pandemic would offer for global universities who are opting online education. So how do you see universities alliances in future? Could you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think we all agree that the pandemic has been a driver for change, and I think a good example is the Indian government recognising, the top 100 institutions in India and their online programs. And if you put that alongside Coursera, FutureLearn, I think there's only going to be more and more opportunities for online learning for universities worldwide. I think the advantage of the global networks is the expertise in the world-leading areas, world-leading institutions in specific areas. So we were talking about, maritime, global change, public health, these areas. So if you get these universities sharing modules on master's degrees, they've already been developing archives, they've got virtual seminars for teaching and postgraduate research, they provide virtual master's classes. So I think what I would say is that these networks are already delivering in that respect, okay? So an example is online master's programs, digital tools to support communication and collaboration among researchers, virtual seminars, cloud-based servers to easily share data and information. So these are already in place before the pandemic and enabled partners to quickly respond when the pandemic hit, to start doing research on student learning during COVID, developing digital clinical skills resources. So I think that's a really interesting one. We are all challenged with online learning. How do doctors, how do physiotherapists, how do people that have to do hands-on face-to-face learning cope in a virtual environment? So there's a lot of research going on in that. And there's also digital capacity to respond to current and future challenges in global education. So I think what I'm trying to really stress is that global networks already have a kind of an ecosystem where they can be doing this to create new innovations. So I think it's going to enable these networks and partner institutions to move very quickly on new and creative methods to deliver online learning. But again, I think the focus is going to be on those research universities' disciplines and goals. So one network we're talking about, Universitas 21, is going to focus on opportunities for its students to make global connections without leaving their own country. So internationalization at home is another one of my big passions. So this is really exciting for me. Another is offering webinars relating to how do you restart your research as a university during a pandemic. And I also very strongly believe that the kind of idea of stackable qualifications will benefit from a network, because you can actually then have a number of multiple sort of world-class universities offering that kind of structure. Particularly, I think we were talking about this as well, Nixon, earlier, how the pandemic has changed the professional working conditions for the foreseeable future. So how are people going to be getting their qualifications going forward? So I think the point is we've got an opportunity to recreate higher education after the pandemic, and it's not about recreating; it's about reimagining it. And I think the networks really are going to be a really good place to do that.
In fact, in one of my talks, we had Dr. Robert Adi, the Dean of the Texas Universities, and he did mention about the stackable qualifications from multiple universities, and he did mention this, that look, that's really the future for the next generation.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like, I think if you've got a ready-made network, you're in a very good position for that.
Joe, I know you have worked in India. And you have very good first-hand experience of working here, and also, I guess, fond memories. I hope it was a good experience. So could you please share it with our audience today?
Listen, my experience was bahut badhiya. Hindi isn't very good, but so I think my first visit was in 1996 when I was working for the University of Southampton, and then I visited 2 or 3 times a year during the 1990s and the 2000s. But I had the biggest privilege of all was that I had a 6-month sabbatical at IIT Roorkee, and in fact, if you allow me, I still have my very fond memories of IIT Roorkee there, with my coffee mug, which was one of my gifts when I left.
Wow.
So that was a fabulous, it was Zabardast, a fabulous experience. I worked with the director at the time on an internationalization strategy for IIT Roorkee, and yeah, it was terrific. And I think really what it gave me was an opportunity to see inside an Indian institution and the kind of challenges that institutions face, but also the tremendous opportunities that are available to Indian institutions and universities. And there are some really great ones, actually, not just the IITs. I mean, OP Jindal. I've been watching OP Jindal because I facilitated a partnership with that institution in Southampton, and they are an amazingly creative, innovative institution. I'd love to see them in a network.
Sure. That's really very interesting, and thanks for sharing that, Joe. You may be aware, Joe, and we discussed this again last week, that the Indian government is keen, and also our new education policy 2020 recommended that top global institutes be permitted to set up campuses in India. This has not yet become law, but what's your take? Would you recommend that allowing this to happen in India?
Yes, please. So I think, but one thing I would say is that many Indian universities have campuses overseas. So why not open up India so that others can come in? And we know that India needs more universities, and it does actually create a competitive environment. So I think that's actually a good thing. I actually experienced the Foreign Universities Bill in 2010, and it did really raise expectations. We were all very excited about it, I can tell you. But realistically, it didn't really encourage international universities to enter the market. So certainly I and many of my colleagues are really hopeful that there's going to be more positive movements towards this activity. Now, I know it's only recommendations at the start. It still has to go through a few more hoops. And I've got some concerns, and I have voiced these with you, about the top 100 universities. Now, there are pros and cons to that. So I understand the need for quality. Very important, and I completely understand that. But if it's restricted to the top 100 in the world, it means there are going to be a large number of very, very good students that aren't going to be able to get into those institutions. And they will be good and able students, and it will be a shame, I think, that they won't have access in that respect. There's also really, and this comes from my experience of having worked in a top 100 university, which is the University of Southampton, but also in a university, Solent University, which is not in the top 100, and actually is a much more vocational practical institution.
I see.
And I actually wonder whether the government should be considering the more vocational practical, more vocational practical universities, which can help, with practical training with students who might want to take on more vocational roles. So I know, very important to have that quality, but I think there are other things that the Indian government could be looking at in that respect. On the pro side, obviously having top 100 in the world institutions partnering or having campuses in India, it does actually encourage other students to come into India, which promotes the Study in India program. So currently, I think there are 47,000 international students studying in India, and that is only 1/6 of the number of Indians who study abroad.
Yes.
So, if you really want to promote, people coming in, then those top 100 will certainly encourage that, definitely.
Are there any examples of education hubs worldwide?
Oh, many. So I think I think India could actually use, it's a very good point, they could use those education hubs as frameworks. And I think it's always a great thing to come into the market sometimes a little later, so you can see how to really excel in those areas. So I think obviously UAE, Singapore, there's a number of kind of really well-established hubs now that India could learn from. I think it's really important about inspections, quality frameworks. They need to be rigorous. I have no doubt that the Indian government will ensure that happens.
Great. Yes, India has opened up the space for foreign universities, and I guess it's a process, and it's a process. It has to evolve.
Sure.
We have some really good universities in India, so I guess there's a good beginning, I would say, and it's a work in progress, and we'll catch up as it goes.
I would enjoy that. That would be good, actually.
Okay. So what's your comment on, or how do you see the future of global education given the disruptive technologies and convergence of future digital economy?
So I think that's the million-dollar question at the moment. I think there's so many webinars, there's so many thoughts, so many opinions, the whole idea of reimagining rather than recreating, So I think I would start with the online. I think the innovations, so I think my point would be that having worked in universities, innovations like online learning and digital technologies have been very, very slow to implement. And all of these technologies have been catapulted forward at a really breakneck speed. Universities have had to implement them just to deal with the current crisis. So it's been one of those fantastic sort of business things where you see things happen because of a crisis. I think the current situation has improved everybody's collective understanding and confidence in online learning. And I think institutional capacities have increased because they've had to. The policy environment has improved. And I think there's obviously going to be much reflection as we go forward on the future. Are students going to want to do everything online? Will they be happy to go abroad? So it's about supply and demand, I think, is the point there. We also have to really, I think for me, and somebody that's worked around quality in education, we need to really be thinking about learning outcomes versus the learning experience. So a lot of people just think we can bundle a bunch of lectures onto Zoom. That will not cut it in the future. There really needs to be some kind of quite key work done around outcomes. So yeah, not about digitizing the learning content. We've got to think about the student support, the student engagement, student access, IT underpinning it all. I don't think face-to-face will be replaced. I'm going to say that now because I've spoken to a lot of parents and a lot of students who are very keen still to have that face-to-face experience. And there will always be those students that can afford that sort of very high cost, high return kind of educational experience away from home. So how do we integrate those experiences to engage with those who aren't able to spend the whole time away? So it's about being creative in the blended learning environment. So I think what I'm saying is, yes, there will be lots of online, yes, there will be lots of digital moving forward, but you will never replace that face-to-face. There will always be that desire. If I might just sort of say, I think that there will be institutions and presidents, vice chancellors who will not be able to make a decision about this. They will want to do business as usual. They will revert to recreating business as usual. I think they will falter or fail. Okay. But there are going to be presidents who are going to take up the challenge with relish, I think, and use the crisis to explore creative ways to take their institutions forward. And I'll just go back to what we were talking about earlier. I think a network provides like-minded people to come together with a common kind of ambition in the face of this kind of adversity. And there's going to be power in those networks, perhaps to work with commercial organisation and consortia. So I think that's a really important point. Those sorts of consortia can help provide and develop sort of services to underpin those new technologies for the future of our kind of global education.
You are absolutely right. I guess we are in a, this is a blessing in disguise, I would say. Education there has been a lot of experiments in education, but this COVID-19, the lockdown has really forced the educationists globally to really rethink and reimagine and redesign, I would say, the whole education system as such. Joe, it has been really pleasure talking to you. Thank you, Joe, for your valuable time.
Thank you so much, Nitin. It's been a pleasure. And I'll look forward to the next one where we catch up when things have moved forward.
Sure.